And I know it's hard to think baseball and feel baseball, and certainly if you're an Orioles fan, hasn't been a whole lot to cheer about here in the offseason. This guy usually talks baseball with us, but he's also a big part of Big Ten coverage, where he has a podcast out there in Chicago, Illinois, where all things Big Ten Network are. He is Seth Gruen. He's one of our defending champions for all things baseball out of Bleacher Report, but comes bearing some basketball gifts in this conversation. Dude, there's a lot more to talk about Big Ten basketball right now, and even the Terps, who are scuffling along with all sorts of depth issues, than there is in baseball right now, where it's really been a frigid hot stove here this offseason, right?
Yeah, I don't think the stove's been turned on or thawed out yet. Not sure what's going on. I know there are a lot of conspiracy theorists out there that think maybe the owners are colluding to wait to the last minute in an effort to help maintain a certain level of salary, and so the players don't get exorbitant amounts of money. But
baseball collusion, who's ever heard of such a thing? No one's ever accused them of such a thing.
Yeah, but eventually the first domino will fall, and then everything will fall into place. I think actually, to be honest with you, the current climate in my mind favors the player, because a lot of these teams are going to be scrambling to fill holes in their roster. Closer we get to spring training, the more urgent it becomes. I mean, look, no one knows that better than a Baltimore Orioles fan, right? Seems like they're making their biggest signings in March year in and year out.
Yeah, so they've all gone to the Dan Duquette model of shopping on the lowest shelf or the highest shelf possible for the least amount, and the closest to the expiration date. You can get it at the dollar store. It really is amazing, but you're hard pressed here 4 weeks out on pitchers and catchers reporting to even know who our pitchers and catchers are at this point in Baltimore. I mean, and I know we're a little bit of an outlier here, and certainly not in the mix of where the Yankees are and the Dodgers and the Indians and teams like the Angels that have been pretty serious here in the offseason. And I know you're in Chicago, where there's that eternal Cubs-White Sox thing, and everybody's waiting for the young stars of the Red Sox to grow up as White Sox here this offseason. But we legitimately don't know who's pitching on Saturday night opening week, because we don't have pitchers here, literally.
Yeah, and look, I understand the frustration. I know that there's certainly within that organization this mantra of getting a player at the best bargain possible and not even wanting to be involved really with any player that's engaging that's engaging two teams in a bidding war. But the reality is, that said, Baltimore's had a nice little run here over the last 5 or so years. So, it's hard for me to completely trash them. That said, maybe they would have had more success if they'd be a little bit more active in the offseason.
Where do you put the Machado thing at this point? I mean, clearly a pox on all their houses for not getting it done at this point. And every week the rumor's on to Boston, it's off. It's on to, Point B. St. Louis, was with flavor until they moved very, very quickly, which the Orioles don't do. And now Arizona's like the rumor on Machado. I've seen this act here, Seth. They're going to screw this up. We've been talking about this for years. He's just going to walk at the end of the year, or they're going to get a bag of donuts for him on July 30th or something, right?
Yeah, at least the last year and a half. Look, these deals are not as easy to execute as they may seem. I think, for example, Rick Hahn and his ability to get the haul he did for really both Chris Sale and Adam Eaton is something that's very, very extraordinary, and I think elevated his stock not only here in Chicago but across baseball as really one of the premier GMs in the sport. But, if you're the Orioles and you're holding on to a piece like Manny Machado, you expect to get transcendent-type minor league talent, similar to what the White Sox got in the Chris Sale deal. And I think there and of itself, you limit yourself in terms of trade partners. How many teams have that kind of young talent to give up, like the Red Sox did? The Red Sox had the best farm system in baseball when they made that trade for Chris Sale, but now, a lot of the best farm systems in baseball are within organizations that are in rebuilding mode. So If
Well,
you're
obviously the
Orioles,
Yankees had that going on, and the Orioles were afraid
true.
to deal with the Yankees. So,
Look,
and I think that's the dumbest thing I can possibly imagine is saying we're afraid of making a bad deal within our own division. That says to me that you're afraid to get out of bed in the morning is what it says to me.
Well, yeah, I mean, I get it, though. You know what Manny Machado is. And look, I don't mean to be an Orioles apologist, but you know how good he is right now, and you have to question whether or not you want to be competing against him when you're engaging in a rebuild. And don't forget, he's a really, really young player. So if you do mess up that trade, if those prospects don't pan out, I think then you're worse off than you already are. So, I get the fact that they don't want to engage in a deal with the Yankees. But, all these factors, I think, are contributing to a market in which, to a market that's really trying to take advantage of the Orioles because they know that maybe their options are limited, maybe because it's gotten up, they don't want to deal with the Yankees. That takes one team off the table. So you don't really have a lot of teams or as many of the elite farm systems bidding for his services and the teams with the elite farm system. So look, I don't want to be an Orioles apologist. I think that they've probably taken some missteps with this, but I want to clarify that executing a trade like this is not as easy as it may seem.
He is Seth Gruen. You can follow his journey out on Twitter at Seth Gruen. That's Gruen. He is out of the Fighting City of Chicago, Illinois, at Bleacher Report as well as at V Sporto, where he also does a bunch of Big Ten stuff. Just the general nature of the offseason and how the tectonic plates shift here in a year where the Astros get a parade sort of against all odds. We got the Indians trying to reload. Red Sox, Yankees firing managers and moving chairs around. The Angels signing a Japanese sensation that's going to pitch, he's going to hit, he's going to catch, he's going to play 9 positions and come out of the bullpen and do all sorts of silly tricks. But then the Cubs sort of are sitting there, and the Nationals and these other teams that were sort of loaded for bear to begin with and didn't make it through. But really the story of the offseason, the New York Yankees, right? I mean, there's them and then there's everything else, right?
Well, yeah, I think they've dominated headlines. I did not get why they fired Joe Girardi, why they let him go, but I guess that's that's New York for you. And when you're managing in pinstripes, the expectations are just a little different. And I think moves are a little bit more reactionary than they are other places. But that said, yeah, I think they've dominated this offseason from that move to the Stanton trade. This team, when you look at the young core they have now, their ability to hit the ball out of the park, which is really what the game's become about, right? Strikeouts, home runs. This team could be on the precipice of another dynasty.
I hate hearing that in the American League East. I think that's the thing we all fear here the most. The strangest thing for the Orioles, Seth, is this dysfunction that has followed them for 25 years. This is sort of the ultimate bursting of the pimple here this year, where Britton gets hurt before they can deal him. Machado has them really held up, at this point, and whether he's a shortstop or a third baseman and enhancing his value for their purposes in August, they don't appear to have any sort of pitching to be competitive. Buck and Duquette are both tied to the end of this year in walking. Adam Jones, who's their franchise guy, who they've tied all the money up into and who believed and bought in early, isn't signed after this year. Brock isn't signed after this year. And oh, by the way, the biggest story, if this were any other organization with the emergence of a guy like Jonathan Scope, the biggest story of the offseason would be, how do we give that guy enough money to buy a few years out so that we don't have the Machado situation with him in 20 and 21?
Yeah, look, I don't deny that it's a grim situation. The answer for the Orioles is probably to hit the reset button, kind of like the White Sox did. I think you got to blow it up and build from scratch again, get as much as you can in young prospects, draft well, try to go with the Cubs model where you're signing, guys to 1 and 2 year deals, try to flip them then mid-season for minor league talent. Look, it can be done quickly. We've seen that. I think the Cubs did it quicker than most thought. I think the Brewers are an outstanding example of how quickly you can do that. And granted, they got some pieces in the Jonathan Lucroy deal, but there are teams around baseball that have turned it around quickly there's no reason the Orioles can't. Obviously, Machado is sort of the fulcrum in all that, and maybe teams are also shying away because, they want to know if they give up a haul of prospects, they can sign him to a long-term deal, which, you never know because he said he's going to enter free agency and test the market.
Well, I think we knew beginning in D.C. last year at the winter meetings that he was going to become a depreciating asset. And, I tipped my cap to them trying to win last year and believing they were going to get something out of Jimenez at the bottom of the rotation and that Tillman was going to be okay. I'll buy into whatever their nonsense was last year that led them to a sub-500 record. But now we're at this really critical phase where they're about to lose everything and get nothing, including their manager and general manager potentially and their star outfielder. And then they say, well, we got Dylan Bundy and maybe he turns into an ace and, and maybe Gausman turns into a 2 or a 3. But beyond that, we still got the big bad Yankees and the Red Sox. And I remember that dark decade around here where they just sort of stopped trying because they were so far away as to not even, put the oars in the water to some degree.
Yeah, I don't know that they're going to stop trying, and I do sense and understand the frustration. I think Bundy's a piece. I really do. Don't forget he was hurt for 2 years, so he's really now just getting his first taste of Major League Baseball, really in earnest as a starter, because a couple seasons ago he came out of the bullpen and then was put in the starting rotation kind of out of necessity. So I understand that. As far as the Red Sox and Yankees go, yeah, things obviously look very, very bright for both of those organizations, but things can turn quickly. I think that we've seen it with the Red Sox. We saw it with Theo Epstein. That's why he left, where a couple of bad free agent signings really saddle you. Maybe some guys don't pan out to be what you thought they would be. That always happens with young prospects. So I don't think that this thing's a runaway train at this point. Again, I think the Orioles need to stay within themselves and really would benefit, again, from a complete and total rebuild that wouldn't take all that long if it was done right.
Seth Gruen joining us here from Chicago, not just the baseball guy out there at Bleacher Report, but also doing a podcast on the Big Ten. Plug your podcast for the Big Ten, and then we can talk a little bit about it. Look, I don't think anybody's talking seriously about the Terps here with these injuries, but it is a fascinating campaign, and we're just at the beginning of it for Big Ten fans.
Yeah, no, the podcast, we'd certainly touch on Maryland. I think that it definitely fills a void for the Big Ten fan. I know that I grew up in Big Ten country, rooting for Big Ten teams, watching them on TV. I think that the nation is now even more exposed to them with the Big Ten network. And really, we're just talking Big Ten football and basketball, having on some of the best guests in the conference. Kata Bates-Diop of Ohio State is going to join me on this week's episode. And, we're seeing our listenership grow. I'd encourage everyone to subscribe on iTunes, Google Play, whatever kind of phone they use. And certainly they can also listen to the podcast in its segmented form at vsporto.com. They're doing a great job putting together and promoting the show, and we're growing.
Certainly for Maryland, the road is going to be tricky. Ohio State, they weren't on the same sort of page. Michigan State, even before Ohio State got there. But we're starting to see some sort of separation. And when you lose Bender, when you lose Jackson, the way they have, you feel the depth, especially on these nights where teams do go 9-10, large. You get in foul trouble. There's going to be illness. There's going to be injury. All those things. This is a tough campaign for Mark Turgeon. I mean, I think a berth in the tournament would be a really, really good year for the Terps at this point.
Yeah, I think, first and foremost, I think any of those fringe or bubble teams out of the Big Ten are going to have a tough time this year. Number one, because I really believe the country loves to hate the Big Ten. I don't know if it's because Jim Delaney wields so much power or because year in and year out, the conference is really considered, the best or one of the two best in both football and basketball, and people are jealous. But this year, the Big Ten really is unusually down, and I thought that the conference would take a step up this year. I thought Michigan would be better. I thought Wisconsin would be better, even though they lost a ton. So, as far as Maryland goes, yeah, I think the road's going to be a little bit tougher just on the basis of the fact that the conference doesn't have as much quality as we thought this year. As far as the injuries go, yeah, the trainer's undefeated, so to speak. If players can't play, if your best players can't play, you're going to have a tough time. And, yeah, I think the injury bug has just hit Maryland. Otherwise, I think that would have been a really, really good team. But last I checked, they're still hanging around the RPI top 50, and if you could do that, you'll give yourself a chance.
Well, and some of these road games are going to be tough for them for sure. And again, anytime Herder's not on the floor, the point guard gets into foul trouble, they're going to have a lot of problems. But bounce back years here. Purdue was not supposed to be this good. They've been very good, and I think to some degree Indiana is having a bounce back after a really, really dark period in turning over yet another coach.
Yeah, big win over Northwestern the other night. I think that, look, as far as Purdue goes, they seem to be one of those teams that we always talk about during the regular season, at least regionally, and then don't do much in the tournament. As far as the year goes, I think sometimes a team can be the beneficiary of coincidence or randomness. And really what you're seeing this year in the Big Ten is a conference that's driven by quality play in the paint. Whether you talk about Michigan State and their length and Jaren Jackson, and even Miles Bridges, who's a big wing player. Purdue has obviously Isaac Haas. You look at Ethan Happ at Wisconsin, even though they're not doing well. I think you look around the conference and most teams have a quality player in the paint, and Purdue just has one of the best right now, or a couple of the best.
Well, I mean, Maryland had no answer for Haas.
Minnesota, for example.
Yeah, we're going to see Minnesota on Thursday night, so we'll get a look at that. Yeah. But, I mean, they had no answer for Haas back in December when they had Jackson and Bender running around. And, now they get into these situations where, to your point, they don't have the – and I love Bruno Fernando, but they don't have enough of that right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And, look, it's year to year. I think that, there are years, or most years, you see the Big Ten that's very guard-oriented. And that's, Maryland's been the beneficiary of that because Maryland's had some really, really good guard play over the past few years. But, sometimes, again, it's randomness, it's coincidence. It's if you fit into the arc of the conference in a given year, that's going to be advantageous. And look, a lot of times the Michigan States, the Wisconsins, the Michigans, they dictate that to a degree. And I think that's a little bit of the case this year.
Well, and certainly Ohio State's got to be the story, right? And I know you're having them on your podcast this week. Mm-hmm. That's a fascinating thing there, how good they've been at football, and had their periods with basketball. But the same thing with Penn State. And, I don't know that Rutgers is ever going to get out of their way, or Indiana on the football side. But from the basketball side of things and how much money there is floating around in that program, you would wonder when they would be more Michigan-oriented and start to get some players. This certainly looks like a year where there's a breakout possibility for them to make a little bit more noise than usual. Certainly here in the early going, they've done that.
Yeah, and obviously all the credit in the world goes to Chris Holtmann and those players, for that matter. An unusual turn of events over the summer with Thad Matta. I thought that, and then they went through a bunch of different coaching candidates who didn't necessarily want the job, arrived at Holtmann, who seems to be the right fit. Look, I went through a similar type scenario when Illinois hired John Gross, and it obviously flopped, being an Illinois alum. But, I think Ohio State has been outstanding. Keita Bates-Diop, who I mentioned will be on the program this week, has been a really, really good player. I think he was snubbed not being named in that mid-season Wooden Award watch list among those 25 names. Really, the only two Big Ten names on that list were Miles Bridges, which you expected, and Jordan Murphy, who's having a really, really good year. But I think Keita Bates-Diop got snubbed. He's one of these guys, by the way, who doesn't need to take a lot of shots to affect the game in a really, really big way. He's over 15% shooting from the field, a guy who's incredibly efficient, and what that allows you to do is it allows you to develop and get other players involved within the scheme of the game. So as far as, your leading scorer, your best player, I think most college coaches would draw up a Keita Bates-Diop. So, he's been a big part of what they've been able to do, and Chris Holtmann has managed to, make sure that team doesn't miss a beat. It doesn't seem like there was a hiccup at all over the summer.
Yeah, we got a whole load of him. He scored 26 against the Terps last week, so we're familiar with him around here. He is Seth Gruen. He does baseball as well as Big Ten basketball out there at Bleacher Report as well as at V-Sporto. You can follow his journey from the Fighting City of Chicago at Seth Gruen. That's Gruen. I'll call you back soon. I mean, pitchers and catchers are going to be reporting here at some point, and I'm sure the Big Ten tournament starting a week earlier and moving off to Madison Square Garden will titillate fans here as we get through February. Seth, take care of yourself. Stay warm out there in Chicago. I'm going to be an honorary Midwesterner here, freezing out in Minnesota for 9 days and then Indianapolis for the Combine, so I will not be working on my tan this winter, Seth.
Yeah, well, it was good catching up with you, man, and Happy New Year. Happy New Year to all your listeners.
Always good to talk to you, man. Seth Gruen does some baseball out there, Gruen, much like Wayne Gruen, who was one of my spiritual godfathers at WITH AM 1230 back in the 1990s, when Seth was a child, I'm sure. Everybody was a child except me in the 90s. I'm the old guy around here. Now, I remember when I used to be the young guy. Turning 50 this year. Purple Rain 2 is getting released on a daily basis out at WNST.net. You want to read about Ray Lewis, read about Ed Reed, read about Joe Flacco, read about O.J. Brigance. This is the week to do that online at WNST.net. The morning newspaper will ship it to you each and every morning at 7 a.m. That's all brought to you by Planet Fitness, where it's still $10 a month. Never any commitment. It's 2018. What are you waiting for? Get in the best shape of your life. Get on out to Planet Fitness and PlanetFitness.com. Get a little inspiration as well at Planet of Triumphs. Really cool website out there to start your day and year here. The BuyAToyota.com audio vault is there holding all the stuff you want to listen to. Listen when you want, where you want, how you want. We podcast, we broadcast live if you want to download the TuneIn radio app. It's all brought to you by BuyAToyota.com. Last but never least, around here, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, streaming live. We do social media out on Facebook Live as well as our YouTube WNSTV channel. I am Nestor. We are WNST.net, AM 1570 and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.